Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids, and in today's video, it's a bit of an opinion piece on Raid Shadow Legends, and the opinion I'm gonna be arguing for is pretty simple. I believe that the increased crit rate buff in Raid is basically a failed buff that simply doesn't really make sense in the modern game. And in fact, if it didn't exist, we'd probably be better off, to be honest. So, outrageous, or does it make sense? I don't know. Let's dive in. Let's talk about it. Obviously, this video, by the way, is inspired by Krosa. And you're saying, Nub, are you really going to do 3 videos inspired by Krosa basically in a row? And the answer is absolutely yes. Why the heck not? I mean, it's not every day, to be fair, you get a 6-star mythical. Even if they have problems, hey, I mean, you have to try and enjoy them, right? So let's go. So Krosa obviously really inspired this because her move is particularly bad, her increased crit rate move. Now, it comes with the Shatter buff, which is actually extremely strong. 15% extra ignore defense is a massive damage boost. But of course, Krosa has 2 big problems. Number 1 being that she's an attack nuker and she will likely outrun increased attack by using this extra turn move. But the other problem, even bigger, of course, with her in particular, is that she puts out True Fear on all enemies. And with Wand of Submission relics being so common, most of the time, multiple times in the actual playtest we've done of her, it feels like about a 80 to 90% chance she gets True Feared instead, which means that 50% of the time, almost, when you go to actually use her A2, her big attack, she misses it because of the True Fear that she's effectively placed on herself. Absolutely awful. You guys know. You've seen the last 2 videos. You guys know, right? You know. But it means that this move, this increased crit rate buff, although it's for 3 turns as well, this is clearly something you're supposed to build her around. You are clearly supposed to build her with 70% crit rate and to use this to get effectively some extra stats out. But what it actually means in practice is that, well, I've switched her now. I'm having much more success since doing this. You actually build her with 100% crit rate and you avoid this move. You go straight into the A2, probably carrying over increased attack, so it's actually even better than this would be, and you use this extra turn to basically cycle back to the A2. Cool, great. But I think increased crit rate, obviously it has problems for Krosa in particular, but I actually think most champions that have it, it's actually quite problematic and a bit weird. So where is increased crit rate? Where's it good? I think the increased crit rate obviously was designed when the game first came out, and I think it just hasn't translated well to today. But I do think that it does work very, very well for new players, right? In the first couple of months or so of the game. Why is that? Well, it's fairly simple. As a new player, number 1, you're probably struggling to get to 100% crit rate on your characters. So an increased crit rate buff can be very, very welcome to really give you a substantial damage boost that you can't otherwise get, and it's pretty awesome. More than that, though, when you start off the game, and let me give you a good comparison here, right? You don't have the gear that's really gonna skyrocket basically this performance. Let me use my Aphidus, because I love my Aphidus. Let me use him as an example. Now, when Aphidus comes in and he starts smacking people, he starts doing damage. He obviously has 100% crit rate, but my Aphidus has 315% crit damage. So his crits really clap. And he also has absolutely tons of attack built up. He also has 6-piece Merciless. He also has a Relic, which is boosting his damage. He also has a Blessing, which is boosting his damage. So when my damage dealer Endgame is doing damage, they have so many boosts, so many stats and effects and everything backing it up. They do crazy damage. Whereas let's say a support, and that's a support I use fairly often, Elva Autumnborn. What if, in fact, I do often run her, I could easily run her with Farrakhan the Fat, right? In Chimera, could still be a viable thing. Guess what? If Elva gets that increased crit rate and she starts landing crits, now, funny enough, I actually have had to build good crit damage on her to avoid her being the ram target in Chimera. But nonetheless, she just, even if she is critting, she doesn't have the crit damage to back it up. She doesn't have the attack. She certainly doesn't have damage sets, or damage relics, or damage blessing. Most of her damage really is coming from War Master. The actual boost that she's getting from increased crit rate, although she can fully take advantage of the extra 30% crit, it just isn't anything substantial at all. Very different for a new player, right? Imagine a new player coming in with your Kale or whatever, coming in with your new account, your new characters. Now I don't have any gear on my Kale, but on a new account, you're not gonna have stats and stuff like I have on my Aphidus, like your Kale or whoever, your Sun Wukong, whatever new character, your Tholen, Cheshire Cat, big one at the moment that's free. Those characters, you probably are only rocking like 150% crit damage. They're not that far ahead on crit damage from your supports. They're not gonna have 5-star blessings, perhaps giving them down. I mean, Michael does, but you're probably not going to have the big blessings giving them damage. You're not going to have really good relics. Yeah, so basically, on a new account in the first few months, that increased crit rate buff, and indeed where it was when the game was first designed, right? And they designed the increased crit rate buff, champions could take much more advantage of it, and giving it to champions was much more of a benefit compared to now, where if you're not built for damage, it doesn't really matter if you're critting or not. You're not actually doing any damage with that crit. You really have to be stacking all these multipliers for crit. So that's a big problem number one for increased crit rate. It made sense multiple years ago, like 7 years ago, I guess, at this point. It makes sense on a new account. It can be pretty impactful, but as you get further and further in the game, it just doesn't really make sense. Let's look at some of the characters that bring increased. There's even a small version of it, God forbid. There's a few, not many actually, that bring increased crit rate to all allies. Relatively few. And how many of these do you actually use for that particular buff, or even use it? Do it on purpose. Like Gizmak is an incredibly good character. He is phenomenal. But who is building their Gizmak with 70% crit rate? Nobody's building Gizmak with 70% crit rate. I mean, especially for him. He needs 100% crit rate at the start of the round to make his thing irresistible. So he's providing increased crit rate when he himself can't even use it. Another weird example. And he's a really strong champion. Or again, the other problem with increased crit rate is he could easily switch forms, and then his increased crit rate is gone. And his big damage dealer form, what's he gonna do if he outruns his increased crit rate buff and now doesn't have 100% crit rate? It is so punishing. That's the other thing about this buff. When you don't have it, it is really, really punishing, and it cripples you. Clearly, Gizmak with his passive is not supposed to actually build less than 100% crit rate himself, so it's a bit of a weird one to add in there. Fina is another great example of an actual good champion who can make use of it, and one of the few cases where you do actually make use of this, because this is the second big problem with increased crit rate. Building a damage dealer with 70% crit rate, if you have this buff, right? So I think my Krosa was a really good example. If I was actually able to use this move without true fearing myself, yeah, I could do it, right? I could build her at 70% crit rate. Yeah, it would nerf her base form damage on her A1 a bit. It's not a huge deal, but I mean, she's giving this to herself for 3 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. Like she's gonna cycle back, and it should be fine. I could build her 70% crit rate and make up the difference with this because she's providing it for herself. But it's a bigger problem if, let's say, you're using an external source like this Fina, because while you're on a team with Fina, no problem, fantastic, brilliant, I'm always getting increased crit rate. But if you are ever using that damage dealer on a team that doesn't have increased crit rate, missing out on that is so crippling, it's so punishing, that it's just not worthwhile. In fact, you'd have to completely change their gear. So yeah, building someone with 70% crit rate, expecting this buff, it's just super awkward unless they're providing it for themselves extremely regularly. It's so awkward because now you can't use them without someone giving them that buff, which is a big problem. And funny enough, Fina is so strong. I actually do use, I think Trunda, she might have 85%. No, yeah, she has 85% crit rate, but like my Trunda is built with lower crit rate, and it's let me push her stats stupidly high because I literally don't use this champion anywhere except with Fina in Hydra. It's literally the only place I use her, and I could probably optimize her even more and get her down to 70% crit rate and crank these stats even higher. But my Trunda is specifically built for that specific team. And part of why I don't use her anywhere else, obviously I don't really need her anywhere else, but even if I did, I couldn't really use her anywhere else because she's so specifically built for it because of that increased crit rate buff and the other stuff Fina does as well. That it's just, she wouldn't be viable. It's too punitive to be without it. So that's another thing. So yeah, here we go. You can see some of these examples, and I think there's almost none of these where I'm like, I'm actually, apart from Fina, where I'm actually intentionally building people at low crit. It's just a bit weird. Lanicus was another one, again, for some very, very, very niche Hydra teams where you would see it. But generally, it's just not something you actually see at all. I thought this was quite funny. Like an increased crit rate single target. Shu Zhen is one where it might be used. Again, Shu Zhen can do it. But you're looking at really specific champions who are going to make use of this. And again, typically for PvP, are you building your damage dealer with 70% crit rate? Well, no, because in live arena they might ban Shu Zhen, or if she dies, or if they outrun this buff and your damage dealer in PvP sucks, it's just not viable. Definitely you could use this in PvE. Again, if you're building like a Siegfried or a Sun Wukong to like one-shot dungeons or whatever, you could use it there, sure, but it's a little bit awkward. But again, I think it's not something's really used. I think Sifi is a hilarious example because I actually forgot that she does this. I've got Sifi. I have a 6-star Sifi. I use her all the time. I actually genuinely forgot before I made this video that she does an increased crit rate buff. Like, can we get a show of hands? You got, like Sifi Rotus, bit of a classic combo. Yeah? How many people using 70% crit rate Rotus, right? And no one's got a 70% crit rate Rotus? Maybe you've got Death Dealer. Maybe you have a Death Dealer relic. You're like, no, but I don't build any crit rate. Ha ha ha, suck it. Fair enough, right? But yeah, again, this is just really, like, this would just be, if this was a shatter buff, right? Or if this was increased crit damage, which is also quite undertuned, it would be fine. But what is this for? Like, who's benefiting from this increased crit rate? Who cares? It's just weird. Like, what damage dealer is building low crit rate? It just doesn't really happen. So yeah, I get, like, who's even using this buff? I think Mezamel we talked about Gizmak, who has increased crit rate, and it doesn't make sense. I've talked about Krosa. It does make sense for her, but she's crippled because the move True Fears, and that sucks. I think, to be fair, it does make sense with Hefrak as well. I think that's okay. Mezamel, I think, is another really good example of a champion who should be really good, but is sort of held back. So she self-buffs with increased attack, crit rate, and crit damage, and then goes in with a big single target nuke. So it's like, cool, okay, I build her for this massive nuke. She has this other problem where she's got this alternate form, which is kind of cool, right? She can ignore unkillable. She can ignore block damage. It's pretty sweet. But this extra form has no way of getting increased crit rate. So if you build Mezamel at 70% crit rate to actually use this buff in her base form, you're basically saying all I've got is my A3 into A2, and if that doesn't work, my alternate form, the whole second form of my mythical, is basically crippled because 30% of the time I'm going to do 0 damage effectively. And that's just a bit shit, isn't it? I don't know what you think. I think it's just a bit shit, to be completely honest. Again, like, where Doom Priest gives crit rate to a random ally. Wow. Just very few. I think the self-buff ones are where it can be potentially decent. But then, again, very often, are you even using it? In relatively few cases, I think that you are. It even goes a bit further, right? I think it's something Plarium has also tried before, is champions with, like, these attacks who are always critical. They've tried a few different variants of this. But like Ethos, this attack is always critical. He's like an old school example. But the thing is, okay, what if I build him with no crit rate? We rely on this. Well, his A2, which is a good damage move, and his A1, which is a good damage move, they suck, right? Yeah, sure, this attack is going to smack because you've ditched crit rate to build loads of more attack and crit damage, but it's on a 4-turn cooldown, and your other 2 moves, which you're using way more often, won't crit and won't do anything. Absolutely awful. So again, who's building Ethos? Well, who's building Ethos these days? Full stop. Very few people. But even if you did, you still build them 100% crit rate. This is just sort of pointless. I think a great example was a mythical they actually had to change. Calamitous. He had this always critical thing. But again, they basically had to change him to have extra chance to crit on everything, right? Because it was, well, sure, his A3 always crits. Makes him scary in PvE waves, like in Faction Wars, makes him a scary enemy. That's about the purpose of it. But like, yeah, for the player, nobody was building Calamitous with like no crit rate because you needed crit rate for everything else that he did. All his other moves need crit rate. What they've actually done with him, and I think this is really good, is they now just have, instead of needing some weird buff, he just has an extra 20% chance to crit on everything. Oh, okay, cool. He's an extra chance to crit on everything. And like this one is always critical. Again, it's really for PvE. But That's okay. That sort of makes sense. All right. So I can build him 80% crit. Cool. That's fun. And it works always. I don't need the buff, right? I don't need someone giving me the buff. If the buff gets removed or I get block buffed, or if I outrun it or I switch form and I don't have increased crit rate, it's not a problem. It's just all baked in baseline. And there's a few champions they've done this on, and it's honestly, it's genuinely way better. Who's another one? Errol's another one. Again, a bit of an older one. He was also reworked, and they had to do the same thing. They gave everything here an extra 30% chance to crit. He just has increased crit rate baked in, and guess what? It's good. He's not an amazing champion or anything. He's decent, but nothing special. But you know, you build him at 70% crit rate. You've got more stat budget for other stats, and it feels quite decent. A much better way. I guess the short point is you need your damage dealers to be consistent. There's another example, actually, before that. Fortis. Fortis has this beautiful thing where he always crits against targets under fear or true fear. Let's go. Hey, anyone here building the 0 crit rate Fortis? So you're going to crit people with fear? Anyone? No one? No one? No one's even building Fortis in the first place? Oh, shit. Okay. But yeah, again, seriously, like, I think this move also always crits if they're under fear, true fear. This one doesn't, though. So his accessible AoE on your damage dealer doesn't have any inbuilt crit thing. So what do you do? Again, yeah, he's got he's got a myriad of problems. But what is the point of this always critting against people under fear? It's even more conditional. It's even more rubbish. And yeah, needless to say, players don't like it. Yeah, they don't like it. So there you go. I think your crit needs to be consistent. I think they could do stuff. I mean, Plarium could experiment with you know, maybe some champions who don't need to build crit. I mean, there was Tolf the Maimed. I think he can solo Sand Devil or something. Yeah, Shogun. He can. Yeah, he can. No, Phantom Shogun can't solo Sand Devil. Phantom Shogun. But this guy cannot be critical. That's kind of interesting, right? There's maybe some stuff they could do around that, or there's. Yeah, I think there's some stuff they could do. They could experiment. They could do fun things. You could make excess crit rate if you go over 100%. Maybe you could have a conversion into crit damage or something. I don't know. They could do some fun stuff to make the buff more make sense in general. But as it is right now, I just don't think it makes sense. I think it is a fail buff. I think, like, how many of these champs, very few that you're actually making use of that increased crit rate buff. I'm sure there's maybe a couple of examples, but general, and more so in the self-buff category. But I genuinely think if you got rid of increased crit rate and you just gave people increased crit damage or shatter or another buff that's just a bit of a damage boost, I don't know, like you can invent a new buff that's just much more generally useful and applicable. And if you really want champions to build lower crit rate, I think it's quite interesting. Champions like Errol and Calamitous, yeah, don't do the Ethos thing and make one move or the Fortis thing and have it just useless because it's too conditional, but having it be like Errol or Calamitous where you go, oh, they've got a good chunk of baseline crit. That's actually quite fun. And you're like, okay, I can build a champion with 70 or 80% crit and still crit all the time. It's consistent, it's nice. I think it makes a lot more sense. So there you go. Guys, let me know. What do you think of increased crit rate? And are there any other things I could rant about in this sort of series? Because I think it is a bit of fun. But yeah, I think increased crit rate, yeah, it's interesting. It's like the game's getting kind of old, right? But it's just one of those things that I think really doesn't translate well into the modern game. Increased crit damage is another one that is really rubbish, unfortunately. Whereas like increased speed has remained incredibly relevant, and increased attack and increased defense, very, very relevant. But yeah, increased crit rate has just been, it's just a rubbish buff. And I think it's actually, when you see it in a champion's kit, you have to look at it. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a mark against them. Like, oh, they put some of the power budget into this increased crit rate buff. It might be okay, but it could also be a massive downside, which is not where you want the buff to be, I think. So there you go. Give me your thoughts. Let me know any other ones that spring to your mind. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hope spurred on some debate in your mind. Ooh, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.